Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Well, things have been really crazy around here lately. More on that soon, but I could really use a vacation right now. Luckily, Roz at Scallydandling About the Books, Rachel Morrow, and Sean the Book Maniac have tagged me to do Steve Donahue's vacation book tag. All I need now is a gin and tonic and a hot tub. Actually, I also need to have the time off. Alas, this vacation will have to be just one of those bookish ones that can be fit into our spare moments when the words in a volume take us to a different world, the easy way. The first question of the tag: what's your favorite book about somebody taking a vacation? Well, right now I'm reading Virginia Woolf's beautiful novel To the Lighthouse, the story of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay who take their children for a summer holiday along the rocky coast of Scotland. The plot of the book is limited. Essentially, Woolf is telling us about families thinking about taking a trip to the local lighthouse, which they don't take. A decade later, some of them finally go on the outing. The book has a beautifully atmospheric style, a quiet and introspective style, the kind of holiday I like most, where I have time to let my thoughts go, deeply or broadly, depending on the moment. I realize that rather than plot-driven vacations, I prefer character or theme-driven vacations. Holidays of interiority, where we have time to learn about each other. No chasings, no murders, not even exciting adventures. Just floating along where the days take us. Maybe wandering around a city or a countryside. Maybe exploring museums where what I see on the walls spark almost unrelated trains of thought. Maybe just sitting on a low beach chair in the sand looking at the lighthouse not far offshore. The second question: do you read travel writing? I don't read a ton of travel writing. Once, while on a long drive, David and I listened to an audio recording of Peter Mayle's Wonderfully Warm: A Year in Provence. He and his wife weren't continuing to travel, but they were exploring their new home, a 200-year-old stone farmhouse, as well as the culture and customs of this region of France, its language and geography. I really loved the author's sense of humor. The next year, while making the same drive, the two of us listened to Under the Tuscan Sun by Frances Mayes, in many ways quite similar to Peter Mayle's book. Exploring Italy rather than France, Mayes recounts her new life in Tuscany, restoring a lovely villa, and especially embracing food culture of shopping for fresh ingredients in the market, cooking them carefully, and sharing them with friends. Both books are engaging and lovely, perfect for audiobook. Next up in the tag: what are your books on vacation rituals? Packing for vacation usually involves choosing both books and knitting projects before clothing. I make different kinds of choices depending on where I'm going, but typically I choose paperbacks, at least one with relatively large print, suitable for airplane reading. These days, I try not to carry too many, since I know I can always read on my phone if necessary, or that I might purchase something in a cool, independent bookstore wherever I'm visiting. My e-reader is so old that I worry that it might give out if I ever were to try to depend on it alone. So I still overpack both books and yarn a bit. And often I mistakenly underpack things like socks or pants. The fourth question: what's your favorite book you found or read first while on vacation? For this question, I'm going to talk about things that are actually vacations, as opposed to family visits. The first is a trip to Ireland that David and I made with our son several years ago for him to study traditional Irish music in a tiny town in Donegal. While he was in classes and performance all day, David and I started reading James Joyce's Ulysses aloud to each other. As we mentioned in our joint video, which I'll link to below, the two of us individually read several different commentaries for each chapter, but came together to read Joyce's text aloud. Sometimes we holed up in our tiny bed and breakfast room to avoid the rain. Other times, we sat outside in the sunshine, passing the book back and forth as sheep gathered around to listen. What could be better than 2 weeks of trad music, great beer, wonderful friends, an amazing book, and fleecy animals galore? The second vacation favorite I'll mention was also a read aloud. When our son was 8 or 9 years old, he went to sleepaway camp in the mountains of North Carolina for a week. It was the same camp I had attended when I was a young girl growing up in North Carolina. David and I chose to rent a little cabin nearby for the week. Every morning we woke up early, made strong coffee and seedy toast, and took our cups out to the porch overlooking a tiny lake and read together. In the late afternoons, you could find us in the same place, this time drinking beers from one of Asheville's earliest craft breweries. This week of our North Carolina vacation was the week that the final book in the Harry Potter series was released. And as we had done with all the previous books, we read it aloud to each other. Those times reading together with David, whether we're on vacation or just at home at the end of a workday, are the source of so many of my bookish memories. Okay, fifth question. Have you ever light-fingered a book from a vacation stay? Yes. Sitting there on a shelf full of seemingly unread vacation potboilers, there was a battered mass-market paperback of one of May Sarton's Solitude memoirs. I read the first half of the book right at the end of our time in the vacation stay, but I didn't finish it until I got home. Does anyone still read May Sarton? I love both her fiction and nonfiction, and have for many years. Anyway, as planned, 1 year later, I brought the beaten-up book back to the vacation house, returning it to its proper home, only to find that the place where we were staying had changed owners, and the bookshelf was now full of crossword puzzles and board games. May Sarton stuck out there even more than she did next to Danielle Steele and Robert Ludlum, who Roz mentioned in her video too, and Stephen King. Onward. The next question asks us to list some of our favorite books set in exotic locales. I'll refrain from a major post-colonial critique of the question and instead talk about a book that tells the story of Western white women who travel to a place they think is exotic, and which the author portrays as exotic. E.M. Forster's A Passage to India. In the novel, Mrs. Moore and Adela explore a set of caves, along with their friend and guide, Dr. Aziz. Adela accuses Dr. Aziz of assaulting her, a charge that the author suggests is apparently false, but not a deliberate lie. As the narrative goes on, we see how racial discrimination and imperialist ideology shape what happens as the case goes forward. In many ways, this book reminds me of the same kinds of issues brought up in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Both books are utter condemnations of imperialism, but both books also are built on a lot of racist assumptions. I've talked about Conrad before. I'll link to it below. In Forster, we see a romanticized and highly mystical portrayal of India and its people, casting them as exotic and other. Hindu characters and culture are drawn even more disturbingly than Muslim characters, as chaotic and uncontrolled. The portrayal enforces a clear distinction between the British and the Indian. Still, at the time of publication, A Passage to India was forward-thinking in its development of sympathetic Indian characters, its commentary on the detrimental effects of racism, and its condemnation of the imperialist project. That alone makes this book fascinating to read and important in literary history. And it's beautifully written, with characters that are emotionally complex, which is more than I would say about Conrad's book. Well, that took a serious tone, didn't it? So much for exotic locations. The next question is, of course, do you think the coronavirus will kill us all? No, but it will almost certainly interfere with some of our travel plans and vacation ideas, as well as our daily lives. It's disrupting education for sure. My son received word early this morning that his college is asking students to move out of their dorms completely by the weekend and not return. Instead, classes will be taught remotely. Yes, the school is trying hard to look out for students who can't go home for whatever reasons, or who depend on their campus jobs to pay their bills. Closing primary and secondary schools is very likely to cause far more disruption. And coronavirus will kill some of the more vulnerable people in our society. Wash your hands and take care of your neighbors who need help for this or anything else. Next, what was the last book you read while on vacation? When David and I visited our college son last fall, I really enjoyed reading This Golden Fleece, A Journey Through Britain's Knitted History by Esther Rutter. I'll link to my full review below. It was a perfect book for reading on our short airplane flight and in our Airbnb, episodic and casual enough that it was easy to pick up and put down as needed. It was also perfect because it spent a lot of time in my book bag, hanging out with my knitting project, a striped black and white triangular shawl. Our other recent vacation was over winter break when we visited my family in South Carolina, where we all read quite a bit. My husband's favorite of the trip, I think, was The Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. My favorite was Geraldine Brooks' book, March, which I reviewed more fully on this channel and will link below. As usual, the final question asks us to tag folks. I'd love to tag Lukash at Totally Pretentious, Jason at Byways in Bookland, and Juan at Bookish Islander. Thanks, Dee, for giving us this little symbolic vacation during this somewhat stressful season. Thanks to Roz and Rachel and Sean for tagging me. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.